It was Aldous Huxley who noted facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. In its latest attempt to ignore said facts, the GOP is now accusing the Obama White House of collecting the personal data of its political opponents. Number one story, irony alert. One of the biggest cheerleaders of the Bush domestic spy program is suddenly worried about your privacy. In an effort to debunk the lies circulating about health care reform, such as the Obama plan will kill your elderly Aunt Mildred, the White House has developed an outreach program posting an online call to action. There's a lot of disinformation about health insurance reform out there, spanning from controlled personal finances to end-of-life care. If you get an email or see something on the web about health insurance reform that seems fishy, send it to flag@whitehouse.gov. That statement was enough to trigger the latest round of GOP scare tactics. Today's purveyor of paranoia, Senator John Cornyn of Texas, accusing the president of compiling an enemies list. One email address at a time, likening the White House truth squatting proposal as another example of Obama spyware. He wrote to the president, "You should not be surprised that these actions taken by your White House staff raise the specter of a data collection program. I can only imagine the level of justifiable outrage had your predecessor asked Americans to forward emails critical of his policies to the White House." Funny you should mention Mr. Obama's predecessor in the issue of privacy, Senator. Funny because you seem to be all for President Bush's warrantless wiretapping program, noting back in 2005, none of your civil liberties matter much after you're dead. Joining me now, Democratic strategist Chris Kofinas. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening, Keith.
Let me start with that crucial point. Assuming Cornyn is right, and he's not, but aren't all these internet addresses already accessible because George Bush mined them illegally, or did Bush only spy on Democrats?
Well, I hope he didn't just spy on Democrats, because it would raise a lot of questions about the bipartisan spirit of the Bush administration. So I hope that's not the case. I mean, listen, you got to take what Senator Cornyn says with a grain of salt. I mean, after all, Senator Cornyn last month raised the specter of the threat from India to justify more funding from for the F-22. I mean, in fairness, he should have justified the threat posed from Canada, given the health care debate. So I think you got to take everything he says and put it into a different perspective.
But this one is particularly juicy because he defended data mining without people's knowledge during the Bush years, but he's now opposed to voluntary sending of White House emails because they might contain the email addresses of people who sent out emails full of disinformation. Nobody tapped him on the shoulder and says, this looks really bad, Senator.
You know, put aside the fact that the White House made it clear that no one's name or address is going to be collected. The point here is to respond to the viral lies and misperceptions that we know are already out there, that are being fed by these various grassroots groups, and that's putting it in, calling them a nice name. And so that, I think, is a very smart strategy from the White House. We live in a 24/7 media environment. These viral lies can spread very fast. So it is important. I think it's critical from the White House perspective, the Democrats' perspective, to respond to them, to know about them, and to respond to them hard and fast.
Well, and to that point also, Republicans used fear of terrorism to make parts of the Constitution optional. You know that. We know that from years of vivid personal experience. But now they're using fear of government intrusion to try to stop a White House from correcting a record on health care reform. When do the Democrats take control of this particular part of the message war, and when do they call the GOP out, not just on fear-mongering, but in this case, on sheer stupidity?
Well, this is, I think, is the real battle that we're going to be seeing play out in the next, 4+ weeks, especially over this hiatus during the summer. If there's a silver lining to the teabaggers, birthers, fake angry mobbers, is that I think it's really impassioned the people out there, the overwhelming majority of Americans that want health care reform. And I think what you're going to see in terms of both the formal strategy that is coming out of the White House and the Congress is an aggressive response. But I also think you're seeing a lot of Americans are starting to speak out and say, wait a second, this is not reflective of what we believe. We actually want health care reform. We want to actually deal with a crisis that has been ignored for decades.
But did Cornyn just, in passing and briefly, give away something that he shouldn't have said? I'm talking about the town hall uprisings and saying they were a good thing. He said fear, I would say, precedes anger, and I think there are a lot of people who tell me they are scared of what they see coming out of Washington. Should we be anticipating that for the next 2 years, 4 years? You have nothing to fear but all fears we can make you think of?
Yes. The reality is fear is the Republican Party's favorite four-letter word. That is all they have. They have no ideas. They have no alternatives. Look at the health care debate. They have offered nothing substantive. This is all about scaring people. It's unfortunate, but this is where I think we've got to respond aggressively, and I think that's where you're going to see from the White House and from the Democrats.
Now, just put an asterisk to your observation about the four-letter words. That does not include Governor Sanford and Senator Ensign. Democratic strategist Chris Kofinas. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Keith.